Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. On the calendar, it looks simple. A window between midnight on Thursday, October 23rd, 2025, and 6 a.m. on Friday, October 24th. That's when Alabama plans to execute Anthony Todd Boyd at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, using nitrogen hypoxia, a gas mask that displaces breathable air with pure nitrogen until the body starves for oxygen and shuts down. In the official language, it's precise. In the public debate, it's polarizing. In a Talladega County courtroom more than 30 years ago, none of that existed yet. Only a July night, a man nicknamed New York, and a crime that left a family grieving and a community stunned. Gregory New York Huguley was 34 years old, living in Anniston, Alabama. On July 31st, 1993, according to the record jurors later heard, 4 men were looking for Huguley over a $200 cocaine debt. They found him on 15th Street in Anniston, pulled up in a blue Ford Aerostar van rented days earlier, and forced him inside at gunpoint. Witnesses heard a man plead not to be killed. The van headed out into the Munford community of North Talladega County, stopping at a gas station for a plastic container of gasoline. At a rural ballpark, the men bound Huguley's hands, mouth, and feet with duct tape, secured him to a bench, and poured gasoline over him. A trail of gas was lit. Flames raced. The men watched as he burned. His body was found the next day. Prosecutors would later argue that each participant played an active role in a kidnapping that turned into murder. Retellings of the timeline carry a chill born of precision. Police and prosecutors built the case with witness accounts, physical evidence, and the testimony of one of the men. The names Anthony Boyd, Robert Sean Ingram, Monique Marcel Ackles, and Duanon Quinte Cox repeat across the file. At trial, jurors heard about the gun, the van, the trip out of town, the duct tape, the gasoline, and the trail of flame. A Talladega County jury convicted Boyd of capital murder during a first-degree kidnapping and recommended death by a 10-2 vote. The trial judge imposed the sentence in 1995. The other men's paths diverged. Ingram, accused of dousing the gasoline and setting the fire, also received a death sentence. Ackles was sentenced to life without parole. Cox pleaded to a lesser murder charge and, under a deal, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. If you only look at the verdicts, you'd think the story ended there. It didn't. After his conviction and sentence were affirmed on direct appeal in Alabama, Boyd turned to state post-conviction proceedings and then federal habeas corpus, standard steps for someone sentenced to die. By the early 2000s, the federal courts had rejected his petition, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. What followed, though, drew Boyd, in Alabama, into the national argument over how death sentences are carried out. For years, Alabama's primary method was lethal injection, using midazolam as the first drug. Boyd joined the wave of method of execution challenges, arguing midazolam wouldn't keep a prisoner insensate to the paralytic and heart-stopping drugs that followed, and, crucially under Supreme Court rules, proposing alternatives. Courts told him those alternatives weren't feasible under state law at the time. The message was blunt. Alabama wasn't required to adopt methods the legislature hadn't authorized. Then the ground shifted. In 2018, Alabama gave death row prisoners a one-time chance to elect nitrogen hypoxia, a method the state had put on the books but hadn't operationalized. Boyd signed the election form. Years passed while the Department of Corrections built a protocol. Meanwhile, the state continued to set execution dates for others. Several lethal injections were halted after botched IV attempts, and in January 2024, Alabama carried out the nation's first nitrogen execution, placing a mask over the prisoner's face and flushing the breathing air with nitrogen until he died. Officials called the procedure lawful and effective. Critics pointed to visible convulsions and minutes of gasping, arguing the method creates the outward appearance of suffocation, even if it is medically clean. The debate that followed was as much about what witnesses saw as it was about what science could definitively prove. When Alabama set Boyd's window for October 23rd to 24th, 2025, the plan called for nitrogen hypoxia. Boyd, now in his 50s, responded with a new lawsuit. He argues that Alabama's mask-based protocol risks an unconstitutionally cruel death, that it produces conscious air hunger before unconsciousness, and that there are feasible alternatives the state is refusing to use. The state answered with a categorical defense of its protocol. The movements seen in prior executions, it says, were either resistance or involuntary spasms, not signs of suffering. If the filings read like competing textbooks, the practical result is simpler. Unless a court issues a stay, the warrant governs. Step back from the pleadings, and this story is still about people. Start with Gregory Huguley. Court records and a clinical autopsy report can't tell us enough about him. What we do know is that he was 34. He was known by a nickname. He died at a lonely ballpark after pleading for his life. He left people who planned a funeral, stood beside a casket, and tried to stitch together a day after. The appellate opinions recount his final minutes in sterile detail because that's what appellate opinions do. The obituary compresses a life into service times because that's what obituaries do. Between those poles is a man whose absence still echoes. Move forward to the night of the murder. The facts feel ritualized from so much retelling. The rented blue van, the Mac 11-style pistol, witnesses near a landmark tree called the Happy Tree, the plea, "Please don't kill me," and the answer, "Come here now." The drive to Munford, the bench, the tape, the gasoline. It is difficult to hear, and that's the point. This is the crime that sent 4 men into the criminal justice system and brought one of them to the brink of execution. This is also a story about co-defendants and how outcomes can diverge from a single night's violence. Ingram, accused at trial of igniting the gasoline, remains on Alabama's death row, his own appeals moving through the courts. Ackles is serving life without parole. Cox pleaded to a non-capital offense and received a life term with parole eligibility. In the death row unit, Boyd has long been active with Project Hope to abolish the death penalty, a group founded by men on Alabama's death row that publishes a newsletter, organizes correspondence, and tries to humanize the people behind the cell doors. Activism from death row is not the usual script. It is, however, part of Boyd's story, evidence of how he has used the limited platform available to him. People who oppose the death penalty hold it up as proof of capacity for change. People who support it answer that the measure is not what a condemned man becomes, but what he did, and that justice for Gregory Huguley's family has been delayed too long. Both sentiments are true to the people who hold them. In the days ahead, these strands, an old crime with searing facts, a victim whose name lives mostly in memory and public records, a defendant who has lived more than half his life under a death sentence, a state testing the boundaries of a newer execution method, will tighten. If the courts do not stop it, the ritual at Holman will proceed. There will be a mask and a strapped-down team and witnesses separated by glass. Somewhere in Anniston, there will be people who remember a 34-year-old man nicknamed New York, and the aftershocks of one night in 1993 will hum again. And in the wider debate, people will continue to argue about whether the way Alabama chooses to end a life tells us anything about justice or only about ourselves. Thank you for watching. If you value respectful, victim-focused coverage, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share your thoughts in a respectful comment below. As always, stay curious and stay safe.